I didn't really know my grandfather well. Most of my memories of him are from the end of his life, really. Uh, the ones from childhood aren't very clear.
He was quintessential family man. Everything he did, it was always with the thought of taking care of us.
He was intelligent and kind, and he was goofy. He was very playful.
A klutz. I remember one time he was raking leaves in the backyard, and I was washing dishes, and I'm watching him through the window. And he climbed into the trash can to jump on the leaves and branches to compress them. Well, what do you think is going to happen when you do that? Right. So he's like doing tumblesalts. He's like flipping upside down. And he came inside. I'm like, "Are you okay?" He's like, "You got to know how to fall. You just give into it. You relax. Relax into the fall."
I still remember him walking around in his, he had like his army shirt with all patches all over it from scouting. In fact, I've got it in the closet. You might want to take some shots of it later. But he'd be walking around, smoking the pierogi cigar, and the events. And that's kind of how I still visualize him.
I mostly remember him from family functions. He was the kind of guy who was always smiling. He was always trying to convince you of some crazy story that wasn't true, but you couldn't help but just believe it a little bit anyway.
My father could be volatile. He would come home and, of course, yell. Kids got hit. There were times some of us got the belt or a wooden spoon. I mean, back in those days, it was an acceptable form of punishment. Today, it might be considered abusive. There's no doubt that if my father gave you that look, all you had to do is give you the look, and you knew, toe that line. If you ignored the look, there were consequences.
Honestly, I'm kind of excited. I want to know who he was, where he was from. I don't even know where he was born. I don't know much about him at all, and when I had the chance, I wasted it.
His mom was Ramirez Castle. Her family came from Forno di Zoldo at the northern tip of Italy near Trieste. His dad was Aharon Kdonian, and he came from Harput in Armenia.
He had left Armenia before the Armenian genocide. At least that's how I remember it. And he traveled. I think it took him like 2 years to make his way. I don't know why he settled in Rhode Island.
He went from France to Canada and came into this country from Canada. And my dad always said he worked his way. He said he swam the St. Lawrence River, but that was a lie. My dad had stories. He didn't swim the St. Lawrence River. He came legally on a train. But then he worked his way across country. And Daddy always said that Baba he worked a ship over to Hawaii, worked in Hawaii, and then came back and settled in Rhode Island.
While Manoug managed to escape the Armenian genocide, the majority of his family was not so lucky. When the strongly Muslim Turkish government moved to eradicate the Turkish Armenians, who they considered to be religious infidels, over 1.5 million Armenians were killed. Like in Nazi Germany, those who were not killed immediately were placed into concentration camps. Of my great-grandfather's family, only his sister managed to escape the massacre.
One of his sisters escaped the Armenian concentration camp. She, from what I understand, she escaped through a hole the size of a cinder block. She was put in a camp. I believe she still had a stamp on her arm, similar to, the Nazi camps. Her name was Nosley. She lived to be 103, and she settled in Massachusetts.
Now settled in Rhode Island, far from the dangers of his home, Manoug began building his family with Ramira. Malcolm, my grandfather, was the first of 3 children they would have.
Well, let's see, he had a brother about a year younger than him. and a sister about 8 or 9 years younger than the two of them.
Mike and Monica, they were all M's.
My grandfather would live in Rhode Island for the majority of his life. It's where he was born, where he died, and where he met the love of his life, Anne Marie.
They went to high school together, but Baba was older than her, so I think he had already graduated. And Nana worked at like a soda shop. Back then they had those pharmacy / soda counters. And she worked there, and he used to go in and kind of stalk her. And he repeatedly would ask her out, and she repeatedly would say no. So it took him a long time to wear her down.
He met my mother when he was she was working at Delfino's drugstore, which is right around the corner from his house. And he says he fell in love immediately. Mom said that she had to think about it for a while.
And the story was that, you know, like today standards, he would be considered a stalker. But so she finally agrees to go out with him, and he's late, like by 2 hours. And back then, no cell phones or anything, and nobody stands up Nana. And when he finally showed up, she was ready for a fight, but he told her his mother had come home exhausted, and he wanted to wash her kitchen floor for her. And she said that's when she fell in love with him. That if he could treat his mother that good, she knew he would treat her that well. It was cute. Cute story.
He was dating her since she was 16 years old. And he kept asking her to marry him, I think 3-4 times before she finally said yes. And they were 20. She was 20 when she married my dad.
Married to a woman he adored, my grandfather set about making a family of his own, one for which he would have to provide.
He had been offered the opportunity to apprentice to his godfather, Uncle Mickey Kdonian, to become a plumber, and he said no, he wanted to be an engineer.
Actually, when they first got married, he worked 3 jobs. And then when, you know, I came along, he started looking for other opportunities. And I don't even know how it came about, but he got a job and he was stationed in the Bahamas, and I was a baby, and your dad was on the way. And he went out to the Bahamas, and they were tracking missiles.
When he graduated Mount Pleasant High School, he went to Rhode Island School of Electronics to become a radio and television repairman, technician. And after that, he went to work for the federal government, Department of Defense.
I think he wanted to be an engineer, but he didn't have the degree or the background. So he was a technical writer for the engineers, so that's what he did. He took their work and he translated it into manuals so that people could understand what it was. And he did that for a long time. Like I said, he worked for GE out in Pittsfield, and then took a job down in King of Prussia.
He carried Navy rank and Air Force rank. They treated him as an officer even though he was a civilian employee. When he was on the base, if he was on a Navy installation, he was a lieutenant commander. If he was on an Air Force installation, he was a major. Although he never wore a uniform, never served. He always wanted to, but because of his bad knees and his bad eyesight, he wasn't allowed to serve. But he, as a trained electronics technician, he was able to work on the radars and keep them maintained and operate them. And, keep in mind, very primitive. This is the early 60s, late 50s, early 60s that he's doing this. And radar had really only come to its own 15 years earlier, like in the 40s.
He never really talked about what it was that he did. So it was only years later when the project was declassified. It's called Project Mole.
When he left that, he went to work for General Electric as a systems test engineer. And what that entailed was they put together electronic components, and his job was to brutalize them, to simulate the conditions that they would be operating under, and try to make them fail so they could find ways to prevent them from failing when they were needed. He did a lot of work on the space program. The last space program he worked on was something called MOL, which stood for Manned Orbital Laboratory. It was a forerunner of Skylab. Most of your contemporaries are not going to even know what Skylab was. Skylab was basically the first space station.
And then, of course, when Nixon cut the space program funding, Bubba was out of a job, so we moved back. We were living in Pennsylvania at that time, and then we moved back to Rhode Island.
And then we moved here, and he was laid off a lot. So whatever he did do, he seemed to be always in a field that had layoffs.
Dad went to work for a couple of guys who had a Riccati's franchise, which is now D'Angelo's. So when you see the D'Angelo's, that's the same company.
And it's where he sliced off his fingers. He was a klutz. He was a danger to himself, not necessarily to others.
And he went to work for them running a New York system, actually, first. And I went to work for him then, too.
And I was actually lucky enough to work with my dad when he was working at Codex.
He expected excellence from his employees. He expected perfection from me because I was his son. He says, I expect you to be twice as good as any of these other people working for me. Why? Because you're my son. I expect more from you. He was pretty tough.
And I was lucky enough to get a summer position, 2 summers in a row. And so I was working in prototype, so Dad and I would ride into work together. And I would build the kits. I would put the kits together from the inventory, from the stuff that he sourced.
What was it like working with him?
Awesome. I didn't see him except on the rides and at lunchtime or during breaks. But it was really cool because everybody there had a very high opinion of my dad, and they had a lot of respect for him.
He always had electronic equipment around the house, always fixing TVs. I don't ever remember him buying a television set. He would always find one. Someone would give him one that was broken, he'd fix it, and we'd use that. I was in high school before we had a color TV, even though they'd been out for years. Because no one ever gave him one until then.
He would find a job, he'd have to travel for a job, and then he'd lose that job. Then he'd go back to doing any work that he could. One thing that's important to remember is through all of that, my dad was out of work frequently when I was in high school, in middle school and high school, and didn't lose the house. You know, he was a saver, he was a budgeter, he was careful with his money, and he kept that roof over our head.
Working a variety of jobs, often more than one at a time, my grandfather did anything he had to in order to provide. However, there were times that work was hard to come by.
When he was out of work, he would do things like be the chaperones on the school field trips. So he went to Providence Plantations with me in my class, called me Princess Red Wing, the whole trip. Totally embarrassed me in front of my friends.
He said once that he wanted to start his family young because he had an older dad. His father was in his early 40s when he was born. And he didn't have fun with them. And he wanted to have fun and grow up with his kids. And that's what he did.
When he would do things, like he would pretend to be a robot, he was a lot of fun. And he would, he'd play with us, you know. He'd take us to the beach. We would make the beach a whole day thing. So Nana would be cooking the night before, fried chicken and macaroni, and put it in coolers into the car, a big jug of lemonade, and we'd drive to Scarborough or Lido and park the car and spend all day there. And Dad would go into the water with us and launch us off his shoulders into the waves. And
We'd walk down to the beach, and we'd walk back. It wasn't that far. So my sister Valerie went into the ladies' shower rooms to shower all the salt off and everything, and one of the employees chased her out. That was the first time I saw my father get angry at someone besides us. He flipped out on these guys. They said, he said, we can't be doing that. She's got every right in the world to use those showers. He said, no, they're for paying customers. He said, bull turd. The sign says free showers. Doesn't say anything about having to pay to park first. And he was right.
He liked doing things with us. He liked getting involved in our stuff. I mean, from a very early age, he was always a Boy Scout. Got your dad into the Scouts.
You know, he was very involved with the Scout troop. He was, Shell was someone who, he actually made such an impression on the young man that the young man was able to make a decent life for himself because of my father's impression on him.
And I have a girlfriend who is married to this man who his own father was quite absent in his life, and he's telling his wife a story of how he learned how to be a great man from someone he knew long ago. And he went on, to say he was a great influence in my life, and I was in the Boy Scouts, and he was compassionate and understanding and kind, and again taught him how to respect himself and how to respect others. And he said, I truly became who I am due to this man. And so my girlfriend said, oh, we should look him up and we should tell him that, And so she said, who is he? I'll help you Google him. And it was my dad. And he was already passed at that point.
Anytime things were bad, he was there. Anytime I needed a hand, he was there. Anytime I needed to talk, he was there. Anytime I needed advice, he was there.
Sunday mornings, he would wake us up singing at the top of his lungs. He was a morning person. He'd get up at 5 o'clock in the morning to get ready to go to work, and he'd be singing in the house, and the rest of us would be going, oh no, it's too early. And but he'd be singing, especially on Sunday mornings. He'd turn the radio on in the kitchen and singing loud, top of his voice.
He was the one we went to for math homework because he understood the new math. My mom didn't understand that. She helped us with other stuff.
My father was fiercely protective of her feelings, protective of her health. She was not, from as far as back as I can remember, she was not a well woman. And he was the one on his hands and knees washing the floor and doing the laundry on Saturdays.
So we were all out of the house at that point when Nana became really sick.
In the beginning, I think he was in denial. He, again, was so fiercely protective of her.
When my mother passed away, he had become diabetic, and he stopped taking care of himself.
When Nana died, he was lost, totally lost.
And he would work all day. She was at Brigham and Women's, and then he would go to Brigham and Women's after work. He'd grab a bite, and then he'd go and sit with her, and then he'd drive home.
There was nothing he wouldn't have done for her. And he would take on anybody who, in any situation, caused her stress. I remember he was yelling over a hamburger one time. Give her the hamburger, she wants the hamburger. She wasn't supposed to have it, it was a dietary restriction.
Lost, devastated. She died in a big part of him died.
And when she died, she still had the phone. Her heart just stopped beating. So there was no pain, she just fell asleep with the phone still in her hand. The last thing she heard was her husband, who she adored, telling her that he loved her.
And he was just getting to Brigham and Women's. He had gone into the garage, which was underground, so he had no reception. They were trying to call him. So the last thing she said to him was she wanted a flavored coffee, like a hazelnut coffee or something. So he went up to the cafeteria. He got them each coffees and a little pastry. And then when he walked in the room, she was gone.
But it was hard for Daddy because he lost my mom. And then 30 days after that, he lost his job.
And he just retreated into a black hole. I remember I went over there, it was about a year after her death, and I remember kind of, shaking him back to reality. We had a little argument. I'm like, the highlight of your life can't be dinner at your daughter's one night a week.
And he had no reason to get up and get dressed in the morning. And so for 3 years, he lived in 2 rooms of a 10-room house, just wandering around, lost.
My dad was the type of guy, as much as he did what he needed to do for his family, he was the type of guy that needed a woman to take care of him.
And it wasn't until he met Rita that he got any kind of release on life again. But by then he'd done the damage.
He was lonely. And then he met Rita, which was wonderful. She's awesome. And they were really, really happy together, and I used to tell him how lucky he was to have found that deep, deep love twice.
She was so good for him, and she loved him to pieces, and he loved her too, although even she knew she wasn't the love of his life, my mother was, but they had a nice, comfortable life together, and God bless Rita, she took such great care of him. And
I actually met on Nana's anniversary of her death, August 16th, and they were together ever since. Rita used to say that my mother got them together.
Most of my memories of my grandfather are from the end. He got really sick, and everyone had to kind of pitch in a little bit. I volunteered to take him to some of his chemotherapy sessions. It was like every week or every other week, and I'd go to his house, I'd pick him up, we'd drive there, I'd sit in the waiting room.
The diabetes did a number on him, and then the macular degeneration, and he couldn't read the books anymore. Then he had kidney failure. He finally died from kidney failure.
And I know Dad loved seeing the kids, so he would try to come when he was at home, and they could have a quiet visit at Rita's house. You know, Joe used to love to play chess with my dad, and so we try to have a home-based visit. And, you know, I'd invite them up, but it was hard for him to travel after a while.
he was tired, and he was sick of being sick. He would just say to me, Shakes, I just don't feel good. I just don't feel good.
I'd finally had enough of just sitting around being on death watch. I couldn't take it anymore. I came home, and then a couple hours later, Liz called, told me that he passed away.
One of the things he used to like to do was stand out on his back deck and look at the stars. And I would stand out there with him and look at the stars.
Like I said, you inherited your driving skills from him, or should I say the lack thereof.
Yeah,
He never saw a curb he didn't hit, a mailbox he didn't bump, or a gas pump guard that he didn't bang into.
I mean, he was the type of dad that would roll around on the floor with you, horseplay, tickle fights, pictures. He loved taking pictures of us growing up.
He used to have this pet peeve about knives when you wash them. You have to put them blade down in the draining board. And I had done the wash, and I had inadvertently, stupidly, left a butcher's knife point up. And he reached to get something, and he scratched his arm. So he picked it up, and he roared. He could roar. Valerie! Boom. And threw it to the floor, where it stuck in the linoleum, this far from my big toe.
He would tell you this long, involved story. When you get to the end, you realize that's not the end of the story, it's a punchline.
I was living on my own. I was in New Hampshire. I was out of school. And I'd come home for the weekend, and when it was time to go back home again, my gas tank would be full. You know, he would have stolen my keys and taken the car out and filled it up. And then when I was halfway home, I'd find $20 hidden either in a pocket of my coat or in my purse.
When we were kids, you know, he loved history. So when we were kids living near Valley Forge, he would always tell stories about Valley Forge, George Washington and the troops in Valley Forge suffering through the winters. And he would tell us that he was there. Now, when you're a small child, you kind of take what your parents say as gospel. He said, yeah, I sold them rugs. They'd wrap themselves up in the rugs to try to keep warm. You know, that being an Armenian rug merchant type of thing, you know, joke, an ethnic slam against his ethnicity. The only problem with that was then we'd go to school and we'd recite these stories to the teachers. And they would just shake their
He was
heads.
a big history buff. So, but he would make up stories, and honestly, it made history interesting for us to think that our dad was there.
He went into the hospital on Memorial Day. It was a Monday. And I was getting divorced. I was working 2 jobs, actually 3, just like he taught me. And so on the Tuesday night, I had to work at Chico's. It was a part-time job I took, and so I called him. I said, Dad, I can't come up. And he said, I understand, sweetie, don't worry about it. I said, well, I'll be in tomorrow. And he said, it's okay, do what you have to do. And he goes, you know I love you, right? And I said, yeah, Dad, I know. He goes, no, listen to me. You know I love you. And I thought it was weird.
He was very depressed. He was at his home, and he was just saying. He said, "I'm ready to go." I said, "What do you mean you're ready to go?" He says, "I've had enough. I don't want to be here anymore."
I remember the last time I saw him, he was just lying in a bed, and I feel like people always say that they look peaceful, but I wouldn't say peaceful, he just looked tired, like he'd been up for 36 hours and had finally gotten to go to sleep, but he just looked tired, and a couple of days later he was gone.